Sarah and Jake had always been a perfect match. They met during their college years, and what started as a casual friendship quickly turned into something deeper. Their bond grew stronger over time, and after dating for several years, Jake proposed to Sarah on a beautiful summer evening by the lake where they had their first date. The proposal was simple, but heartfelt, just the way Sarah had always dreamed. The sparkling diamond ring he slipped on her finger was a symbol of their deep connection, and it meant the world to her. They both felt that they had found their forever person when they married. Sarah had never imagined that things could go wrong. Their lives were filled with love, joy, and small shared victories, getting their first apartment together, adopting a dog, celebrating birthdays and anniversaries, and laughing about silly things. They weren't rich, but they didn't mind. What mattered was that they had each other, and that was enough for them. Jake worked as a mechanic at a local auto shop, and Sarah worked part-time as a receptionist at a nearby clinic. While their jobs weren't glamorous, they loved the simple life they built together. They spent weekends cooking together, hiking through the nearby woods, or just cuddling on the couch with a bowl of popcorn and their favorite movies. Life was simple, but it was theirs, and they were happy. But life, as it often does, took an unexpected turn. It started with Jake's job. The auto shop where he worked, once busy and thriving, began to slow down as more people opted for cheaper, quick-fix services elsewhere. Over time, the shop's customer base shrank, and Jake started to worry. He tried his best to stay positive, but it was hard to ignore the signs. Eventually, the inevitable happened. He was laid off. The news hit Jake hard. He had always prided himself on his work ethic, and now, suddenly, he was without a job. He couldn't help but feel ashamed. Sarah tried to comfort him, telling him that they'd figure things out, but deep down, she, too, was scared. She had her part-time job, but it barely paid enough to cover the rent and bills. The pressure was building on both of them, but they refused to let it show. They kept telling each other that everything would be okay, that things would work out. But as the weeks went on, the strain became impossible to ignore. Jake applied to other jobs, but the competition was fierce, and no one was hiring. The bills started piling up. The rent was due, the car insurance had to be paid, and there was always something else demanding their attention. Every day felt like a struggle to keep things together, and they both felt like they were losing control. Sarah began to take on extra hours at her job, trying to bring in more money. But it still wasn't enough. They were living paycheck to paycheck, and every time Sarah looked at Jake, she could see the worry in his eyes. One afternoon, after a long day at work, Sarah came home to find Jake sitting on the couch, staring at the TV but not really watching. He looked exhausted, defeated, and something inside Sarah broke. She knew he was struggling, but she didn't know how much. They hadn't talked about it much, but the weight of their financial troubles was getting too heavy to bear. That night, as they sat at the dinner table, Sarah couldn't help but notice how much Jake had changed. His smile, once so easy and natural, was now rare. He was distant, withdrawn, and seemed to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. Sarah tried to talk to him about how she was feeling, but the conversation always ended the same way, Jake brushing it off, telling her that everything would be fine, that they just had to keep going. But it was getting harder for Sarah to believe that. The anxiety she felt each day was overwhelming. She hated seeing Jake struggle, but she felt just as trapped as he did. One evening, as she was cleaning up after dinner, Sarah noticed something that made her heart skip a beat: the ring on her finger, the wedding ring that Jake had given her on their wedding day, the symbol of their love and the commitment they had made to each other, had always been more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a reminder of their vows, of the life they had promised to build together. Sarah loved that ring, loved what it stood for, and couldn't imagine parting with it. But as the days passed, Sarah's mind began to race. The bills were overdue, the rent was coming up again, and there didn't seem to be any way out. The money they had saved was almost gone, and the pressure of their financial situation weighed heavily on her. She began to think about the one thing that could possibly solve their problems: the wedding ring. She knew how much it meant to her, but she also knew that, without it, they could buy some time. It was worth quite a bit of money, and if she sold it, it could pay off some of their debts, get the car fixed, and maybe even help them get back on track. The thought of selling the ring made her stomach twist with guilt, but in her heart, she felt like it was the only option left. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. The decision gnawed at her, twisting her insides into knots. She tried to push it away, to ignore the thought, but it kept coming back, stronger each time. She knew Jake would never agree to sell the ring. He would never want to part with it, not after everything they had been through. But Sarah also knew that they couldn't go on living like this. They needed a solution, and fast out the next morning, Sarah made up her mind. She would go to the pawn shop and sell the ring. She hated the thought of it, but she felt like it was the only way to keep their heads above water. She didn't tell Jake. She knew he would be upset, and she couldn't bear to see the disappointment in his eyes. Instead, she took the ring off her finger, slipped it into her pocket, and walked out the door. The pawn shop was only a few blocks away, but the walk there felt like a lifetime. With each step, Sarah's heart felt heavier, but she knew she had no choice. When she arrived, the man behind the counter looked up as she approached. "I need to sell this," she said, her voice shaky but determined. The man studied the ring for a moment before giving her a price. It was far less than it was worth, but it would be enough to cover the bills for a while. Sarah hesitated for a moment, the weight of her decision sinking in. But then she handed over the ring. It was done. The man gave her the money, and she walked out of the shop, clutching the cash in her hand but feeling empty inside. The ring was gone, and she knew that, no matter what, things would never be the same again. The days following the sale of the wedding ring felt like a blur for Sarah. She tried to keep up a brave face for Jake, pretending that everything was okay, even though inside, she felt like her world was slowly crumbling. The money she had received from the pawn shop covered their bills for a while, but every time Sarah looked at Jake, she couldn't escape the feeling that something had shifted between them. The connection they once had felt distant now, like an invisible wall, had sprung up between them. Jake hadn't noticed anything at first. He was still in the middle of his job search, and the weight of their financial struggles continued to hang over them both. But as the days passed, he grew more withdrawn. He became frustrated with the lack of progress in his job hunt, and his pride, which had always been one of his strongest qualities, started to crumble. He couldn't help but feel like he was failing. Sarah failing to provide the life they had dreamed of when they first got married. Sarah had hoped that things would improve, that the time they had bought with the money from the ring would give them the chance to catch their breath. But it didn't. The weeks turned into months, and nothing seemed to change. The weight of their troubles, which once felt like something they could tackle together, began to feel like a burden that was too heavy for either of them to carry alone. One evening, after another long day of searching for work and trying to keep their spirits up, Jake sat on the couch, his face buried in his hands. He hadn't said much all evening, and Sarah could feel the tension thicken the air. She wanted to reach out to him, to tell him that everything would be okay. But she knew that things weren't okay, not really. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and tired. "I'm sorry, Sarah," he said, his words catching in his throat. "I just feel like I'm failing you. Like I'm not the man I promised to be when we got married." Sarah's heart ached for him. She could see the pain in his eyes, the frustration that had been building inside him for months. He had always been the strong one, the one who made her feel safe and secure. Now, he looked like a man who had lost his way. "Jake, you're not failing me," Sarah said softly, sitting beside him on the couch. "This isn't your fault. We're in this together, okay? We'll get through this, I promise." Jake shook his head. "I don't know, Sarah. It's just, I can't do anything right. I should be taking care of us. I should be doing more." Sarah wanted to tell him that she understood, that she knew how hard he was trying. But the words didn't seem enough. Instead, she hugged him tightly, hoping that the simple act would remind him that he wasn't alone, that they were in this together. But the truth was, Sarah felt alone too. The sale of the wedding ring had left a hollow space inside her that she didn't know how to fill. Every time she looked at Jake, she wanted to tell him the truth, what she had done, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She knew how much the ring had meant to him. She knew he would be devastated, and she couldn't bear the thought of adding to the weight he was already carrying. Days passed, and Jake's frustration only seemed to grow. He was still looking for work, but the longer he went without success, the more discouraged he became. The tension in their apartment was palpable. It felt like the walls were closing in, and every conversation seemed to lead to the same dead end. Then, one day, as Sarah was running errands, she passed by the pawn shop where she had sold the ring. The shop's bright sign seemed to taunt her, reminding her of the choice she had made. A wave of guilt washed over her, and she felt a tight knot form in her stomach. She had never meant for it to come to this. She had hoped the sale of the ring would be a temporary fix, a way to keep them afloat while they figured things out. But now, it felt like she had betrayed Jake in some way. The ring wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of everything they had built together, and by selling it, Sarah felt like she had given away a part of their future. Later that evening, Jake came home looking more defeated than ever. He had been to several interviews, but no one had called him back. The sense of hopelessness that hung over him was more than Sarah could bear. She had to tell him. It felt like the right thing to do. The truth would be out, and maybe then they could start to rebuild not just their finances, but their trust in each other. "Jake," Sarah began, her voice trembling, "there's something I need to tell you." He looked up at her, his eyes tired but attentive. "What is it?" I sold the wedding ring," Sarah confessed, her words coming out in a rush. "I know it was a stupid decision, but we were drowning, and I thought it would help. I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know what else to do." Jake's face went pale. For a moment, he didn't say anything. His mouth opened as if he wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. The silence between them felt like an eternity, each second stretching longer than the last. Sarah could feel her heart pounding in her chest, and she braced herself for his reaction finally. Jake let out a deep breath and looked away. "You sold it?" His voice was low, and there was an edge of disbelief in it. "I didn't know what else to do," Sarah repeated, her voice breaking. "I thought it would buy us some time. I thought it would help." Jake stood up, pacing the room. "How could you do that?" he asked, his voice rising with emotion. "That ring was everything to me, Sarah. It wasn't just a ring. It was a promise. It was the symbol of everything we've been through together. And you sold it just like that?" Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes. She hated seeing him like this, hated that she had hurt him in a way she never intended. "I didn't want to sell it," she said softly. "I never wanted to hurt you. But we were struggling. Jake, I thought it was the only way." Jake stopped pacing and turned to her, his face filled with confusion and hurt. "I don't know what to say. I'm just so angry, Sarah. I don't know what to do with this." Sarah reached out for him, but he stepped back, his emotions tangled in a mix of anger, disappointment, and pain. She understood. She knew how much the ring had meant to him. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." And in that moment, the room felt emptier than ever. Neither of them knew where to go from there. But one thing was certain: the path they were on would never be the same again.